The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune overhead as I stared at the same 15 lines of code I'd been debugging for the past hour. Tuesday evenings at TechFlow Solutions had a particular quality, that dead zone between afternoon productivity and the freedom of going home when the office felt suspended in corporate purgatory. My monitor cast a blue glow across my face while I traced through the logic error that was making our mobile app crash every time someone tried to upload a photo. "Still here, Martinez?" Ben Rodriguez poked his head over the cubicle wall that separated our workstations. His dark hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, a habit he'd developed during stressful coding sessions. "It's almost 8. Even the janitors have more of a social life than we do." I rubbed my eyes and leaned back in my ergonomic chair, one of the few perks of my recent promotion to senior developer. This bug is driving me insane. Every time I think I've got it, it finds a new way to break. The promotion had come with better pay, a slightly larger desk, and the expectation that I'd work longer hours to justify the additional responsibility. At 27, I was supposedly hitting my stride in the tech world, but most days felt like an endless loop of problem-solving other people's poorly written code. "Want to grab dinner? That new Korean place down the street is supposed to be?" "Good." Ben was already packing his laptop into his messenger bag. Optimistic about my answer, despite knowing my workaholic tendencies. "Rain check," I said, turning back to my screen. "I want to crack this before tomorrow's stand-up meeting." Ben shrugged and headed toward the elevators, leaving me alone with the soft clicking of keyboards from the few other developers still scattered around our floor. The office after 8 p.m. was a different creature, quieter, more focused, stripped of the social pleasantries that filled the daytime hours. No meetings, no impromptu brainstorming sessions, just the pure relationship between programmer and code. I was deep in a particularly stubborn function when footsteps approached my cubicle. The rhythm was unfamiliar, not Ben's casual shuffle or the hurried click of our perpetually stressed QA team. I looked up to find Sarah Chen standing beside my desk, and I felt my concentration scatter like startled birds. Sarah was our senior project manager, the kind of professional who commanded meetings with quiet authority and could translate between the technical team and the business executives who spoke in buzzwords and quarterly projections. At 34, she had the polished confidence that came from surviving corporate politics and a divorce that everyone knew about but no one discussed. Her dark hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, though a few strands had escaped to frame her face. She'd traded her blazer for a simple cardigan that made her look less like a manager and more like a person. "Jake," she said, her voice carrying that slight hesitation that suggested whatever she wanted to discuss wasn't routine. "Can you help me with something? It's personal." The word personal hung in the air between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. In the 18 months I'd worked at TechFlow, Sarah and I had maintained the kind of cordial professional relationship that involved project updates, the occasional witty exchange during team meetings, and the mutual respect that develops between competent colleagues. We'd never ventured into personal territory, never shared more than surface-level small talk about weekend plans or vacation destinations. "Depends," I heard myself saying, though I wasn't sure why I felt compelled to add conditions. "Can you keep a secret?" Her eyebrows rose slightly, and for a moment I thought I'd crossed some invisible line of workplace propriety. Then her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but suggested I'd surprised her in a good way. "Only if I'm involved in it," she replied. And suddenly the fluorescent lit cubicle farm felt charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the servers humming in the F's background. We looked at each other for a beat longer than necessary, both of us seeming to realize we'd just stepped into different territory. The exchange felt loaded with possibilities I couldn't quite name, like we'd been speaking in code about something neither of us was ready to acknowledge directly. "What kind of help do you need?" I asked, saving my work and turning to face her fully. Sarah glanced around the mostly empty office, then back at me. "I need to move some things. Furniture. Boxes." I was going to hire movers, but she trailed off, seeming to debate how much to reveal. "It's at my ex-husband's place. I've been putting it off for months because the thought of dealing with it alone felt overwhelming." The confession was more vulnerable than anything she'd ever shared in our professional interactions. I found myself studying her face, noticing the slight tension around her eyes that suggested this request had cost her something to make. "When?" I asked, already knowing I'd say yes regardless of the inconvenience. "Saturday morning?" "Your weekend, and I wouldn't ask if Sarah," I interrupted gently. "Of course I'll help." Her shoulders relaxed, and I realized she'd been holding her breath, waiting for my answer. "Thank you. Really. I'll pick you up around 9. After she left, I sat staring at my computer screen without seeing the code. The bug that had consumed my evening suddenly seemed trivial compared to the question of why Sarah Chen had asked me, specifically to help her close a chapter of her past. She had other friends, closer relationships, people who knew her better than a colleague she'd worked with for a year and a half, yet she'd chosen me to witness whatever emotional archaeology awaited in her ex-husband's house. I finally gave up on debugging and headed home. But my mind kept returning to the way she'd said, "only if I'm involved in it." Like she was offering me a secret worth keeping. Saturday morning arrived, gray and drizzling. The kind of Pacific Northwest weather that made staying in bed seem like the most reasonable option. I stood in my apartment's kitchen, drinking coffee and questioning whether I owned appropriate clothes for moving furniture. My wardrobe consisted mainly of work attire and weekend casual wear that had seen better days. Nothing that seemed right for helping a colleague navigate the emotional minefield of retrieving belongings from a failed marriage. Sarah's Honda Accord pulled into my apartment complex's parking lot at exactly 9 a.m. She was punctual in everything. A trait I'd noticed during our team meetings, where she arrived with color-coded notes and timelines that made the rest of us look perpetually unprepared. This morning she wore jeans and a soft gray sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of its usual professional style. The casual look transformed her from the polished project manager into someone more approachable, more human. "Good morning," she said as I climbed into the passenger seat. Her voice carried the careful cheerfulness people used when they were nervous. "I brought coffee and bagels. Figured we might need fuel for whatever we're walking into." The drive to her ex-husband's house took us through suburban neighborhoods where perfectly maintained lawns and matching mailboxes spoke of lives organized around mortgage payments and school districts. Sarah navigated the familiar streets with the automatic precision of someone who'd made this journey countless times. Though her grip on the steering wheel suggested those times hadn't always been pleasant. "How long were you married?" I asked, partly to fill the silence, and partly because I realized how little I knew about her life outside the office. 8 years, she said, her eyes fixed on the road. "We bought the house in our 3rd year, thinking we'd fill it with kids and dinner parties and all those things people do when they're convinced they've figured out how to be adults." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Turns out we were just 2 people who were good at playing house until we weren't." The house, when we reached it, was a 2-story colonial with a brick facade and a front yard that someone clearly tended. With care, it looked like the kind of place where happy families lived, where children played in the backyard and parents hosted barbecues for neighbors who'd become friends. The cognitive dissonance between its appearance and the reason for our visit felt almost surreal. "He's not here," Sarah said, apparently reading my hesitation. "Business trip to Denver. We coordinated this through lawyers because that's where we are now." She sat in the driveway for a moment, staring at the house like she was steeling herself for battle. "But I kept putting this off because once I take my things, it's really over. No more reasons to come back, no more excuses to delay the inevitable." Inside, the house felt like a museum of a life that had stopped mid-sentence. Family photos still lined the mantelpiece, though I noticed Sarah had been carefully cropped out of several frames. Her belongings were concentrated in the guest bedroom. In a corner of the basement books, a reading chair she'd apparently treasured. Kitchen items that spoke of someone who actually enjoyed cooking. Photo albums that contained the visual history of a relationship's rise and fall. We worked mostly in comfortable silence, creating a careful choreography of lifting and carrying that brought us into closer physical proximity than our professional relationship had ever required. When she struggled with a heavy box of books, I moved behind her to help, and for a moment we were pressed together, my arms around her arms. both of us focused on not dropping her collection of contemporary fiction. The contact lasted only seconds, but I found myself hyper-aware of her proximity, the faint scent of her shampoo, the warmth of her body, the way she fit naturally against me. "Thank you," she said quietly as we set the box down by the front door. And I wasn't sure if she meant for helping with the books or for something larger. By noon, we'd loaded most of her belongings into her car and my hastily borrowed truck. The physical work had been straightforward, but I could see the emotional toll it was taking on Sarah. She moved through the house with the careful composure of someone determined not to break down, though I caught her pausing in doorways, her fingers trailing along surfaces that held memories I couldn't access. "Coffee break," she suggested when we'd finished with the heavy lifting. "There's still some in the kitchen." We sat on her ex-husband's couch, soon to be just his couch, drinking coffee from mugs that probably held their own history of mourning, conversations, and lazy Sunday afternoons. Sarah curled into the corner of the sofa, her shoes kicked off, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her all morning. "Been putting this off for months," she admitted, staring into her coffee cup. "It's not just the moving, but accepting that this part of my life is really over. I kept thinking maybe if I left my things here, some part of the marriage was still salvageable. Pathetic, right?" "Not pathetic," I said. "Human. It's hard to close a chapter when you're not sure what the next one looks like." She looked at me, then really looked, as if seeing something she hadn't noticed before. "Is that what you're doing? Waiting to figure out what comes next?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "At work." "Right, holding back. Like you're capable of more than you're letting yourself do. I've watched you in meetings, seen how you solve problems, and sometimes I wonder if you're afraid to want something bigger." It was the most personal observation anyone had made about me in months, and it hit closer to home than I was comfortable admitting. "Maybe I am," I said. "Sometimes it feels safer to drift than to risk failing at something that actually matters." "I used to think that too," Sarah said. "But drifting is just another kind of failure, isn't it? The failure to try." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our confessions settling between us like shared secrets. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I couldn't face this alone, Jake. Not the practical part. I could have hired movers. But I needed someone to witness this, to see me closing this chapter and moving forward." "Is that make sense?" It made perfect sense, though I couldn't entirely explain why. Something about the way she'd chosen me for this intimate task felt significant. Like she was trusting me with more than just her furniture and photograph albums. She was trusting me with her vulnerability. Her process of becoming whatever version of herself came after divorce and disappointment. "I'm glad you asked me," I said, and meant it, as we packed the last of her belongings. I realized I was seeing Sarah Chen for the first time, not the polished professional who managed timelines and stakeholder expectations, but the woman who'd built a life with someone and watched it dissolve, who'd chosen to trust a relative stranger with her most private moments of grief and transition. The carefully maintained boundaries between us had shifted without either of us formally acknowledging it. And I found myself wondering what would happen when Monday morning arrived and we had to pretend this Saturday had been just a favor between colleagues. Monday morning hit me like cold water. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting my collar for the third time and trying to convince myself that helping Sarah move furniture was just what any decent colleague would do. But as I knotted my tie, I kept remembering the way she'd looked sitting on her ex-husband's couch, shoes kicked off and defenses down, asking me to witness her transition into whatever came next. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt longer than usual, filled with the familiar anxiety of wondering whether weekend interactions with coworkers would make Monday awkward. I'd never been good at compartmentalizing personal and professional relationships, mainly because I'd never had much occasion to practice. My social circle consisted primarily of Ben and a handful of college friends who'd scattered to other cities after graduation. Sarah represented uncharted territory, a colleague who'd suddenly become something more complicated, though I couldn't name exactly what that something was. "You're here early," Ben observed as I settled into my cubicle at 8:15. He was already deep in his morning routine of coffee, email triage. Odd. and the sports headlines that would fuel his lunchtime conversations. And you look, I don't know, different. Good different. Did you finally take my advice and download that dating app? I powered up my computer and tried to look busy with the kind of Monday morning tasks that didn't require much thought.
Ouch.
Got a good night's sleep for once, right? Ben said, clearly unconvinced. You've been weird all weekend. Usually you text me back within an hour, but Saturday you went radio silent. Meet someone interesting. The question hung in the air while I pretended to review my calendar. I couldn't tell Ben about Sarah without revealing details that weren't mine to share. Her divorce, her vulnerability, the trust she'd placed in my all of it felt too private to translate into the casual gossip that filled our friendship. My silence was apparently answer enough. I knew it, Ben said, lowering his voice to avoid attracting attention from nearby cubicles. Who is she? Someone from that tech meet you dragged me to last month.
Yes.
It's not. I started, then stopped. How could I explain that I'd spent Saturday helping a colleague move furniture and somehow felt like I'd crossed into emotional territory I didn't know how to navigate? It's complicated. Complicated how? She's married, has kids, lives in a different time zone. I paused, searching for words that would satisfy Ben's curiosity without betraying Sarah's trust. Someone I work with. And before you say anything about office relationships being a bad idea, I know, which is why it's complicated. Eyebrows shot up. Office romance. Is Jake Martinez your dark horse? Anyone I know? The conversation was interrupted by the sound of heels clicking across the office floor. I looked up to see Sarah approaching the project management area, which was separated from our development section by a low wall of filing cabinets and potted plants. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse, her hair pulled back in its familiar professional style. Every inch the composed project manager who'd run our team meetings with quiet efficiency for the past 18 months. But something was different. As she settled at her desk and began organizing her morning materials, I caught her glancing in my direction. When our eyes met, she offered a small smile that seemed to carry the weight of Saturday's shared confidences. It wasn't the polite acknowledgement we usually exchanged, but something warmer, more personal. The look lasted only a second before she turned back to her computer, but it left me feeling oddly breathless. Earth 2, Jake, Ben said, waving a hand in front of my face. You're staring? Like obviously staring? Please tell me it's not Sarah. Chen, my stomach dropped. Why would you say that? 'Cause you've been looking at her like she's some kind of puzzle you're trying to solve. And she just smiled at you like, I don't know, like you to share some kind of inside joke. Ben studied my face with the intensity of someone who'd known me since college and could read my tells. Oh man, it is Sarah. Jake, what did you do? Nothing, I said quickly. I helped her with something over the weekend. It's not what you're thinking. What am I thinking? That it's romantic? Or something it's not? She needed help moving some stuff, and I was available. That's it. Ben didn't look convinced, but before he could press further, my computer chimed. With a new email notification, sender's name made my pulse quicken. Sarah Chen. Jake, thank you again for Saturday. Hey, I know it wasn't the most exciting way to spend your weekend, but having someone there made all the difference. I couldn't have done it alone. I hope this doesn't make things weird at work. I value our professional relationship and don't want to complicate things unnecessarily. Best. Sarai read the message twice, analyzing every word, choice, and punctuation. Mark, like it was code that needed debugging. The formal tone suggested she was trying to restore professional distance. But phrases like made all the difference and I couldn't have done it alone hinted at something deeper. The line about not making things weird felt like she was experiencing the same. Monday morning uncertainty I spent 10 minutes crafting my response, writing and deleting sentences that seemed either too casual or too formal. Finally, I settled on something that matched her careful tone while leaving room for interpretation. Sarah, it was my pleasure to help. What you did Saturday took courage, and I was honored to be part of it. Nothing weird, here's just the usual Monday morning debugging and coffee consumption. Let me know if you need anything else, Jake, after hitting send. I immediately second-guessed every word choice. Honored to be part of it felt too intimate for a colleague email. Let me know if you need anything else might sound like I was expecting another personal request. But it was too late to recall the message, so I tried to focus on the code. Review I was supposed to complete before the afternoon stand-up meeting? The rest of the morning passed in a strange state of hyper-awareness. Every time Sarah walked past our section, I found myself looking up from my screen. The team meeting, I listened to her voice for subtle changes in tone that might indicate she was thinking about Saturday. When she made a joke about project deadlines being more flexible than IKEA furniture instructions, I wondered if it was a reference to our weekend adventure or just coincidental humor. By lunch, I realized I was being ridiculous. Sarah was right. To try to maintain professional boundaries. Whatever had shifted between us during those quiet hours in her ex-husband's house was probably just the natural result of shared vulnerability. It's not the beginning of something that should complicate our work relationship. I resolved to follow her lead and treat Saturday as a one-time favor between colleagues. But as I walked past her desk on my way to grab coffee, she looked up from her computer screen. "How's the debugging going?" she asked, her voice carrying the same casual tone she'd always used, but her eyes held something warmer. "Getting there," I replied. Turns out the problem was in the error handling logic. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the hardest to see. Isn't that always the way? She said, and I had the distinct feeling we weren't talking about code anymore. As I continued toward the break room, I wondered if she was experiencing the same internal conflict I was, the desire to acknowledge what had passed between us on Saturday, while maintaining the professional facade that our jobs required. The email exchange had been our attempt to reset boundaries, but the undercurrent of awareness remained, humming beneath our careful politeness. Like electricity waiting for the right conductor, the question wasn't whether Saturday had changed something between us. It clearly had. The question was whether we'd be able to pretend it hadn't, and whether we even wanted to try. 2 weeks after the furniture moving, Sarah appeared at my cubicle with a casual suggestion. "Coffee tomorrow afternoon?" she asked. "I'd like to discuss project coordination. There's a quiet cafe on Pine Street." Something in her tone suggested this wasn't entirely about work, but I nodded anyway. The Grind Caf was exactly the kind of place where serious conversations happened. Exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and enough ambient noise to ensure privacy. Sarah had claimed a corner table. Project folders spread out like props in a play about workplace productivity. We spent 20 minutes discussing actual work timelines, client expectations, technical constraints. But as we settled into our second round of coffee, the conversation shifted. "How long have you been at TechFlow?" she asked. 18 months. "Second job out of college?" I stirred my coffee, curious where this was heading. "What about you?" "For years." Sarah's professional mask seemed to slip slightly. Sometimes I wonder if I stayed because it was right or because I was afraid of another big change. The admission surprised me. Sarah always seemed so confident, so settled in her role. "What kind of change would you want?" I asked. "I don't know." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "When I was married, David made most of our big decisions. After the divorce, I realized I'd forgotten how to want things for myself." She paused, seeming to debate how much to reveal. 8 years together, 6 married. No children, we kept saying someday. When it ended, everyone asked what I wanted next, and I honestly didn't know. That must have been terrifying. Terrifying. And liberating, but mostly lonely. Her voice grew quieter. "Success feels hollow when you have no one to share it with. I go home, order takeout, review schedules, until I fall asleep on the couch." Her honesty compelled me to match it. "I know. That feeling. Not the divorce, but the ... drifting. Sometimes I feel like I'm waiting for my real life to start. Like everyone else figured out how to be an adult, and I'm still pretending." Sarah looked at me with something like recognition. "Maybe figuring out what you want is part of the process," she said. And then her hand covered mine on the table. The contact lasted maybe 4 seconds, but I felt it like electricity. Neither of us acknowledged what had happened when she pulled away, but the air between us had changed completely. We talked for another hour about books, travel, abandoned dreams. Sarah mentioned photography she'd given up during marriage. I shared my secret writing ambitions. When we finally left, we'd established a pattern neither wanted to name. "This was helpful," Sarah said, by our cars. "We should do this regularly." "Absolutely," I replied, both of us pretending it was about project coordination. 3 weeks into our coffee routine, TechFlow announced a conference in Portland. Sarah, as senior project manager, would naturally attend. What surprised everyone was her request that I accompany her instead of Marcus or the more senior developers. "Jake's been instrumental in our mobile development," she explained during the team meeting. "His perspective would be valuable." Ben shot me an envious look, but I tried to appear professional while my stomach did flips. The flight to Portland was a careful dance of professional distance. Adjacent seats, conference schedules, industry discussion, anyone listening would hear only appropriate colleague conversation. But I was hyper-aware of every accidental brush of her arm, every shared glance at our notes. Our hotel rooms were 3 doors apart. We maintained polite distance during sessions, shared tables with other attendees, played our professional roles perfectly. But underneath ran a current of heightened awareness that had nothing to do with tech presentations. During the formal dinner generic ballroom, salmon or chicken, keynote speaker droning about digital transformation, Sarah and I sat with other attendees, making appropriate industry small talk. But when the networking reception began, she appeared beside me. "Want to get some air?" she asked quietly. I could use a walk. Portland's downtown was perfect for evening strolls. We wandered through streets lit by soft streetlights, eventually finding a small park with mature trees and winding paths. The setting felt removed from our corporate world, intimate enough for difficult conversations. "I have a confession," Sarah said as we stopped beside a fountain. "What kind of confession?" "I specifically requested you for this conference." She paused, gathering courage. "Marcus has more experience. David knows more about architecture. But I wanted you here." "Why?" Her voice grew softer. "Because I feel more like myself around you than I have in years. More authentic. More ... alive. I know it's complicated, but I needed you to know that." The words hit me like a revelation I'd been hoping for and dreading. "Sarah, I've been going through the motions since my divorce," she continued. "Telling myself professional success was enough. But these past weeks, talking with you, it's reminded me what genuine connection feels like. Standing in the soft park lighting, all our careful professional distance suddenly felt like elaborate denial. I've never connected with someone the way I connect with you," I said quietly. "I thought maybe I was imagining it, but I wasn't, was I?" "No," she whispered. We moved closer without conscious decision. Sarah tilted her face up, lips parted. And for one suspended moment, the world faded. The conference, our jobs, the complications, then voices echoed from the park entrance. It's other attendees seeking air, and we sprang apart like startled deer. The flight home was filled with unspoken tension. We discussed conference takeaways with renewed professionalism. But underneath, both of us were processing the line we'd crossed. The almost kiss had changed everything, even though technically nothing had happened. Monday, after Portland, felt like walking through a minefield. Every interaction with Sarah required careful calibration, professional enough to avoid suspicion, but not so distant as to deny what had happened in that park. By Wednesday, the tension was unbearable. That evening, as I packed up my laptop, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Can you stay late? We need to discuss the Portland follow-up." The office after hours had become our sanctuary, the place where honest conversations felt possible. I found Sarah in her corner office, but instead of her usual composed posture behind the desk, she was pacing like a caged animal. "Close the door," she said without looking at me. The soft click of the latch seemed to seal us into a space where different rules applied. Sarah continued her restless movement between window and desk, her professional facade cracking with each step. "This is complicated, Jake," she began, not meeting my eyes. "I'm your senior." There, it's policies about workplace relationships. I could lose my job. You could lose yours. What if I'm willing to accept complicated? I interrupted, stepping closer. What if I think some things are worth the risk? She stopped pacing then, turning to face me with an expression that mixed fear and longing. No. You don't understand what you're asking. Then explain it to me. Sarah's composure finally shattered. I've been alone for 18 months, she whispered. Not just single-alone in a way that felt permanent. I'd convinced myself that professional success was enough, that I didn't need personal connection. Her voice grew stronger as the words poured out. But then you started staying late, asking thoughtful questions, actually listening to my answers. And suddenly I remembered what it felt like to be seen by someone. Sarah, I'd given up on finding real connection, she continued. Told myself it was safer to focus on work, that wanting more was selfish. It's not selfish, I said, moving closer until we were only inches apart, and you're not alone anymore. I've never felt so understood by anyone, I admitted. These past weeks, our conversations, they're the best part of my day. Hell, they're the best part of my life. The air between us hummed with electricity. Sarah's eyes searched my face, looking for certainty in a situation that offered none. We do this, she whispered. Everything changes. Everything already has changed. This time, no conference attendees interrupted. This time, when Sarah tilted her face up and I leaned down, our lips finally met. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, then deeper as weeks of suppressed longing found expression. When we broke apart, both breathless, Sarah rested her forehead against mine. We'll have to be careful, she said. We will be, and discreet. Absolutely. Keep this between us while we figure out what it means. Agreed, I said, though part of me already knew what it meant. It meant everything. Thursday morning required an Oscar-worthy performance. Sarah and I exchanged polite greetings, discussed project timelines with appropriate professional distance, and generally behaved like colleagues who'd never shared intimate confessions and empty offices, but everything felt different. When she spoke during the team meeting, I heard undertones in her voice that no one else could detect. When our eyes met across the conference table, the brief contact carried the weight of shared secrets. You're glowing, Ben observed as we walked to lunch. Like actually glowing. It's weird and kind of gross. I don't glow, I protested, but I could feel the smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Right, and I suppose you also don't check your phone every 30 seconds, or volunteer to work late 3 nights this week. I'd been more careful than I thought, but Ben had known me too long to miss the signs. It's complicated. Everything's complicated with you lately. Just tell me she makes you happy. She does, I admitted, and it felt good to acknowledge that much. Even without details, Sarah maintained perfect professionalism during work hours. But I caught subtle signs, the way she lingered when dropping off-project updates, how her fingers brushed mine when passing documents. The small smile she tried to hide when she thought no one was looking. After hours became our time. Carefully worded text messages about project discussions that led to extended conversations in her office or my car, in the parking garage. Our coffee shop meetings took on new significance, the same corner table. But now we could acknowledge the connection we'd been dancing around for weeks. What are we doing? Sarah asked during one of these sessions, her hands wrapped around her cappuccino cup like an anchor. What is this? I'd been asking myself the same question. I don't know, I said honestly. But I know I don't want it to. Stop. She smiled then, the kind of genuine expression I rarely saw from her during work hours. Neither do I. We began sharing deeper pieces of ourselves. Sarah told me about her childhood in California, her parents' expectations that led her into business instead of the art she'd loved. I shared stories about growing up with immigrant parents who'd sacrificed everything for my education. The pressure I felt to justify their investment. Sometimes I think they see my success as validation of their choices, I said. Like if I don't achieve enough, their sacrifices were meaningless. Is that why you're afraid to take risks? To write? Maybe. Or maybe I'm just scared I'm not good enough. You're good enough, Sarah said firmly. You're more than good enough. Those conversations, stolen in coffee shops and empty offices, felt more intimate than any physical relationship I'd ever had. We developed a careful rhythm, professional during business hours, personal through carefully encrypted channels. Sarah would send project-related emails with subtle undertones only I could read. I'd respond with technical updates that included private messages hidden in plain sight. The mobile app debugging is going well. Found some interesting solutions to problems I didn't know existed. Glad to hear the troubleshooting is productive. Sometimes the best discoveries happen when we're not looking for them. Ben remained suspicious but stopped pressing for details. Our coffee shop meetings became regular fixtures, justified by the legitimate project. Work we actually accomplished alongside the personal conversations. Then Sarah invited me to her apartment. "I have some project files at home," she said after our team meeting. "Client feedback that might help with your debugging. Could you stop by tonight?" Condo occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse downtown, exposed brick. Floor 2 ceiling windows. Furniture that spoke of someone who'd rebuilt her life with intentional choices. It felt nothing like the house we'd emptied months ago. "This is beautiful," I said, taking in the space that was so distinctly hers. "I bought it after the divorce. Wanted something that was completely mine." She moved to a bookshelf filled with photography books and framed prints. "David always said my pictures were a waste of time." She pulled out a photo album I hadn't seen during the move. "Want to see what I was like before I learned to be practical?" The photographs were stunning, candid shots of strangers. Landscapes that captured emotion rather than just scenery. Portraits that revealed something essential about their subjects. "Sarah, these are incredible. Were incredible. Past tense." "Past tense?" She sat beside me on the couch, close enough that I could feel her warmth, because I let someone convince me they didn't matter. That I should focus on real career goals instead of artistic hobbies. Maybe it's time to convince yourself otherwise. Looking through those photos, listening to her talk about the person she'd been before marriage, shaped her into someone more cautious. I realized we weren't just attracted to each other. We were falling in love with who the other person was beneath their professional armor. "This is more than I expected," Sarah said quietly, echoing my thoughts. "More than you wanted?" "No, more than I thought I deserved," we both acknowledged. The stakes that night. This could complicate everything we'd worked for, jeopardize careers we'd spent years building. But sitting in her living room, surrounded by evidence of the creative spirit she'd almost lost, watching her eyes light up as she talked about dreams she'd set aside, I knew we'd already made our choice. We were choosing each other despite the risks. Maybe because of them, we'd perfected the art of invisibility. Professional distance during meetings, casual hellos in hallways, the kind of polite colleague interactions that revealed nothing. But underneath ran a constant current of awareness, the brush of fingers when passing documents, shared glances across conference rooms, coded language in emails. Our real relationship existed in stolen moments, late evening texts, coffee shop, conversations disguised as project reviews, quick kisses in empty parking garages. We developed an elaborate system of signals. Sarah adjusting her reading glasses meant she wanted to meet after work. My choice of coffee mug in meetings indicated whether I could stay late. The red ceramic mug meant I was free for dinner. The blue metal one meant I had other obligations. It should have felt like enough, but maintaining the facade was exhausting. The strain showed in small ways. Sarah had started drinking more coffee, her usual 2 cups becoming for by noon. I caught myself checking my phone obsessively during meetings, hoping for her carefully worded messages. We were living double lives, and the cognitive dissonance was taking its toll. My sleep patterns had shifted, staying up late to text her after Ben was asleep, waking early to read her good morning messages before heading to the office where we'd pretend we were nothing more than colleagues. The workplace had become a stage where we performed elaborate choreography. In team meetings, I'd deliberately sit 2 seats away from Sarah to avoid any appearance of favoritism or familiarity. She'd direct questions to me with the same professional tone she used with everyone else, though I'd learned to detect the subtle warmth that crept into her voice when she said my name. Our project collaborations had to be carefully managed. Too much interaction would raise suspicions. Too little would seem unnatural given our roles. "You're being weird," Ben announced. During lunch, studying me with the intensity of someone conducting a criminal investigation. Secretive weird. You disappear every evening, dodge questions about your weekend plans, and you smile at your phone like a teenager. I'm not weird. You volunteered to work late every night this week? That's beyond weird, that's suspicious. And don't think I haven't noticed you've stopped eating lunch with the team. You grab something and disappear to your desk, typing messages to someone. I couldn't explain that working late meant waiting for the office to empty, so Sarah and I could have 20 minutes of honest conversation in her office. Or that my mysterious weekend plans involved hiking trails where we could hold hands without fear of recognition. The lunch hour disappearances were for phone calls, brief conversations, where we could hear each other's real voices instead of the carefully modulated professional tones we used in meetings. Even simple activities had become complicated. Grocery shopping required checking for colleagues' cars and parking lots. Restaurant choices were limited to places where TechFlow employees wouldn't venture a Thai place across town. A small Italian restaurant that catered to an older crowd. Coffee shops in neighborhoods where tech workers didn't congregate. We were living like fugitives from our own professional lives, constantly looking over our shoulders. The irony wasn't lost on me that the relationship that made me feel most authentic required the most elaborate deception. We'd started keeping mental notes of which colleagues lived in which neighborhoods, whose cars to avoid in parking lots, which lunch spots were too risky. Sarah had memorized the work schedules of everyone who might recognize us, while I'd become an expert at reading the TechFlow employee directory like a surveillance manual. "Sometimes I wonder if we're being selfish," Sarah said during one of our coffee shop meetings. Dark circles under her eyes suggested the emotional strain was affecting her sleep. Keeping this secret, maintaining the pretense, maybe we're just making things harder than they need to be. My sister keeps asking why I seem happier, but won't talk about it. My mother wants to know if I'm dating anyone. I hate lying to them. The only selfish thing would be denying what we have, I replied, reaching across the table to touch her hand briefly. This is the best part of my life, Sarah. Whatever complications come with it, they're worth it. But even as I said the words, I wondered how long we could sustain the careful balance between professional integrity and personal happiness. Some days, the weight of secrecy felt heavier than the joy of connection. I'd started having dreams about being discovered, nightmares where Ben confronted us in front of the entire team, where HR called us into meetings, where our carefully constructed professional lives collapsed in spectacular fashion. Office gossip was an occupational hazard we'd naively underestimated. Sarah's improved mood hadn't gone unnoticed. She smiled more during meetings, seemed less stressed about deadlines, even made jokes during team presentations. Made her more effective as a manager, but it also made her more visible. People noticed when someone who'd been quietly professional for years suddenly started humming in hallways and bringing homemade cookies to team meetings. The transformation was remarkable, but dangerous. Sarah had started wearing brighter colors, trading her usual blacks and grays for blues and greens that complemented her complexion. She participated more actively in office social events, no longer finding excuses to skip happy hours or birthday celebrations. The change was positive. From every perspective except one, it attracted attention we couldn't afford. Sarah's been different lately. I overheard Marcus telling Ben by the coffee machine. Happier. Think she's dating someone? She's got that glow people get when they're falling in love. Ben's response made my stomach drop. Jake's been acting. Weird too. Secretive. Both of them working late all the time. You don't think there's something going on between them, do you? Marcus laughed. Jake and Sarah? He's too young for her. Besides, she's way out of his league. Probably just coincidental timing. Maybe they're both seeing people from outside work. The conversation continued, but I'd stopped listening. The fact that our names were being mentioned in the same sentence, even dismissively, meant we'd been less careful than we thought. I spent the rest of the morning analyzing every interaction we'd had in recent weeks, looking for moments that might have seemed suspicious to observant colleagues. The paranoia that followed was almost unbearable. Every conversation with colleagues felt like a potential interrogation. I started varying my lunch schedule to avoid Ben's probing questions, taking different routes through the office to minimize chance encounters with Sarah that might look suspicious. I even began deliberately seeking out conversations with other female colleagues, hoping to muddy any patterns people might be noticing. Sarah was experiencing similar stress. She'd started scheduling more meetings with other departments, ensuring her calendar looked appropriately diverse. We'd had to abandon our subtle signal system when she realized that Marcus had started paying attention to her mannerisms, commenting on her new nervous habit of adjusting her glasses. That afternoon, Ben staged what could only be called an intervention. "I'm worried about you," he said, cornering me by my cubicle after most colleagues had left. "You're keeping secrets, avoiding questions, and frankly, you're starting to act like someone with something to hide." Before I could respond, he continued, "Is it Sarah? Because if you're having an affair with your supervisor, that's a career-ending move for both of you. I've seen how you look at her during meetings, and lately, she's been looking back. The tension is obvious if you know what to look for." The directness of his question knocked the breath out of me. "Ben, I'm not judging. I'm concerned. You're my best friend, and I don't want to watch you destroy everything you've worked for." TechFlow has strict policies about supervisor-subordinate relationships. If HR finds out, you'll both be fired. And if it ends badly, the professional fallout could follow you for years. His words carried the weight of genuine friendship and professional experience. Ben had been at TechFlow longer than me, had seen other workplace relationships implode spectacularly. His concern was real, which made it harder to dismiss. That evening, I told Sarah about Ben's suspicions. She went pale, sinking into her office. Chair like someone who'd received devastating news. "Maybe he's right," she whispered. "Maybe we should end this before someone gets hurt. I can't afford to lose this job, Jake. After the divorce, I rebuilt my entire life around this career. If I'm fired for an inappropriate relationship, I'd rather risk my job than lose you," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. Sarah looked at me with something between gratitude and terror. "You don't know what you're saying. You're 27. You can recover from a career setback. I'm 34 with a divorce on my record and a reputation to maintain. If this goes public, I might never find another management position. Know exactly what I'm saying? This is SITS, worth fighting for." We made new rules that night. No more lingering glances during meetings. No accidental touches when passing documents. Email communication, strictly professional, with no hidden meanings or double entendres. We'd meet outside the office only once per week, alternating locations to avoid establishing patterns. If we were going to continue, we needed to be smarter about it. Our first full weekend away from the city felt like emerging from underwater. A small coastal town 2 hours north, where no TechFlow colleagues would vacation. We drove separately and met at the hotel, registered under Sarah's maiden name to avoid any paper trail. We walked on the beach holding hands, ate dinner without checking over our shoulders, fell asleep in the same bed for the first time. "This is what normal feels like," Sarah said, curled against my chest as morning light filtered through hotel curtains. "Maybe we can have more of it," I replied, though we both knew Monday would bring back the careful choreography of secret keeping. The weekend had shown us what our relationship could be without constraints, but it also highlighted how far we were from that freedom in our daily lives. By winter, we'd found our rhythm. Professional colleagues who happened to be deeply in love, maintaining separate public lives while building something real and private. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. The early months of constant vigilance had evolved into a more sustainable pattern. Though the underlying tension never completely disappeared, Sarah had started taking photography classes again. Her apartment, filling with new prints that captured the quiet beauty she'd forgotten how to see. The creative renaissance had made her more confident at work, too. She spoke up more in meetings, challenged assumptions, led with the kind of passion that reminded everyone why she'd been promoted to senior management. I loved watching her in professional settings now, seeing the way her eyes lit up when discussing innovative solutions. Knowing that I got to witness the private moments when she'd text me excited updates about her latest artistic breakthrough. I'd finally shown her chapters from my novel. She read them on her couch while I paced her living room, terrified of her judgment. The story was semi-autobiographical, about a young man navigating love and ambition in corporate America, and I'd worried she'd see too much of our situation reflected in the fictional relationship. When she looked up with tears in her eyes and said, "Jake, this is beautiful. You have to finish it," I felt something shift inside me. Maybe I was good enough after all. The secrecy had become second nature, but it had also strengthened us in unexpected ways. We'd learned to communicate with extraordinary subtlety. Raised eyebrow during presentations could convey entire conversations. Shared coffee orders became love letters in disguise. The constraints had made us more creative, more intentional about the time we had together. Every stolen moment felt precious precisely because it was stolen. We'd developed an intricate system of coded communication that would have impressed intelligence operatives. Our shared project documents contained hidden messages and tracked changes that we'd delete after reading. Sarah would leave books in the office library with highlighted passages that spelled out meeting times and locations. I'd send her technical emails where the first letter of each paragraph formed words that only she would notice. The elaborate nature of our secret. Language had become almost romantic in its complexity. The physical limitations of our relationship had forced us to become experts in emotional intimacy. We knew each other's thoughts, dreams, and fears better than couples who'd been together for years. Our conversations during lunch breaks disguised as project meetings had revealed childhood memories, family dynamics, and philosophical beliefs that most people never shared. Even in traditional relationships, Ben had stopped investigating my personal life, though I sometimes caught him watching Sarah and me with knowing eyes. One evening, as we were leaving the office, he pulled me aside. "I don't know what's going on with you, and I'm not asking," he said quietly. "But you seem happy, grounded, like you finally figured out what you want." "Thanks, Ben. Just ... Be careful, okay? Whatever this is, be smart about it. Know that if you need someone to talk to, I'm here. No judgment, no questions you don't want to answer." His words carried the weight of true friendship concern. Mixed with respect for my privacy, I realized that Ben's suspicions had evolved into acceptance, that he'd chosen to trust my judgment even when he didn't understand my choices. Sarah and I had learned to communicate in a language only we understood. Shared documents that contained private messages hidden between project updates. Coffee orders that conveyed emotional states. Her usual cappuccino meant everything was normal. But a latte meant she needed extra support that day. The brush of fingers that lasted just long enough to remember we chose each other every day. We'd created traditions that belonged only to us Tuesday. Evening calls disguised as project check-ins, where we'd discuss everything except work. Weekend hiking trips to places where anonymity was guaranteed, a shared journal we passed back. And forth through interdepartment mail, disguised as routine documentation. The journal had become our most treasured secret, filled with love letters, poetry, sketches, and plans for a future we couldn't yet openly discuss. The holidays had been particularly challenging. Office parties where we had to maintain professional distance while wanting nothing more than to celebrate together. Sarah had spent Thanksgiving with her family, fielding questions about her love life that she couldn't answer honestly. I'd gone home to my parents, who noticed my improved mood but couldn't understand why I wouldn't bring my mysterious girlfriend to meet them. "What happens long term?" Sarah asked during one of our weekend escapes, this time to a cabin in the mountains where we could build fires and read books and pretend we were a normal couple planning a normal future. "We can't keep this secret forever. At some point people will notice that we're both consistently happy but never seem to date anyone else." "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know I want to find out with you. Maybe one of us changes departments. Eventually, maybe we find jobs at different companies. Maybe we just get so good at this that we can maintain it indefinitely." The conversation reflected a shift in our thinking. In the early months, we'd lived day by day, crisis by crisis. Now we were planning months and years ahead, treating our relationship as a permanent feature of our lives rather than a temporary complication. 6 months ago, she'd asked if I could keep a secret. I joked that I could only if I was involved in it. Now I understood that the best secrets aren't the ones you hide from the world, they're the ones you live inside of. The private truths that make everything else bearable. Our secret had become a sanctuary, space where we could be completely ourselves while the outside world saw only professional competence. We were building something beautiful in the spaces between public and private, professional and personal. It wasn't conventional, it wasn't simple, but it was ours. That was enough.